The night began like any other. Claire switched on the television, letting the soft light from the screen fill the living room. The house felt quieter than usual. Her husband David had been away for work all week, and the silence around her seemed louder every evening. She wrapped a blanket around herself and tried to lose focus in a comedy show. But her thoughts kept wandering. Ethan, David's son, walked in and sat beside her. He had moved back home after finishing college, still figuring out what direction he wanted to take in life. Claire had always thought of him as polite, respectful, and thoughtful. Their conversations had been friendly, but never too personal. Yet as he settled onto the couch that night, Claire noticed something different about him, something in the way he carried himself, more confident than before, more like a man than the boy she had first met years ago. At first, they watched in silence. The jokes from the show played in the background, but neither of them laughed. Claire felt his presence beside her, closer than usual, though he hadn't moved closer at all. She tried to brush it off as her imagination. Maybe it was just the loneliness of the week catching up with her, making her more aware of the company she had. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher around her shoulders. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan glance at her. Not quickly, not by accident, but in a way that lingered. It made her pulse skip for a moment. She told herself it was nothing, just a look, nothing more. Still, she felt it. The air seemed heavier than before, as though the silence between them carried words neither of them had spoken. The room was the same as always, the same beige couch, the same coffee table stacked with magazines, the same soft light from the lamp, but everything felt different. Claire tried to force herself to focus on the television. She even laughed lightly at a joke, though it wasn't that funny, hoping to ease the tension. Ethan gave a small smile, but it wasn't at the show. It was at her. That smile unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She shifted again, tucking her legs under the blanket, and asked casually, "How was your day?" Her voice was calm, but inside she was trying to slow her racing thoughts. "Not bad," Ethan replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes stayed on her for just a second too long. "I went to the gym, applied for a couple of jobs." "The usual?" She nodded, keeping her gaze fixed on the screen. "That's good. Something will come through soon, I'm sure." "Thanks," he said quietly, and for a moment the silence returned. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it wasn't normal either. Claire felt it in her chest, in the quickening of her heartbeat. She knew it wasn't right to notice these things, but she couldn't stop herself from being aware. The warmth of him sitting beside her seemed to reach her even through the blanket. Minutes passed, the sound of the show filling the room, but Claire wasn't following the storyline. Her mind kept circling back to Ethan's glances, to the strange energy that hung between them. She thought about David, how often he was away for work, how she never complained, how she had promised herself to be patient and understanding. She had always believed she was strong enough to handle the distance. But in that moment, sitting beside Ethan, she felt something crack in the wall she had built around her loneliness. She adjusted the blanket again, trying to cover her nervousness with small, ordinary movements. But Ethan noticed. His eyes followed her hands, and then he looked into her face. It wasn't a bold stare, but it wasn't casual either. There was meaning behind it, something he hadn't said yet. Claire's throat felt dry. She tried to keep her breathing steady. She didn't know why she felt so unprepared, as if something important was about to happen. The room seemed to shrink around them, the hum of the TV fading into the background. She thought back to when she first met Ethan years ago. He had been quiet, shy, still a teenager figuring out who he was. She remembered making small talk at the dinner table, helping him with little things around the house, offering advice whenever he asked. She had never thought beyond that. He was her husband's son, nothing more. But tonight, as she sat next to him, she realized how much he had changed. There was maturity in the way he held himself now. His voice was deeper, his eyes steadier. He wasn't the boy she had once guided. He was a man with his own thoughts, his own emotions. And something about the way he looked at her told her that those emotions might be about her. Claire's heart tightened. She didn't want to believe it. She told herself it was her imagination, that she was reading too much into simple things. Maybe it was just her own loneliness playing tricks on her. Maybe she was only noticing because David wasn't there. But then Ethan shifted slightly closer. Not enough for it to be obvious, but enough that Claire felt a change. Her body stiffened. She clutched the blanket tighter, staring at the television without really seeing it. She needed to break the silence to put space between them with words. But before she could think of what to say, Ethan's voice cut through the quiet. "Claire," he said softly, almost like he was testing the weight of her name. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his. The seriousness in his gaze made her heart race faster. There was no smile, no hint of casualness. It was the look of someone carrying something unsaid. Claire swallowed, her lips parting slightly, but she had no words. She could only wait for what he might say next. The room seemed to hold its breath. The television kept playing, but they were in another world entirely. One where the air between them was thick with questions. Claire knew deep down that something was about to shift. And then Ethan leaned just a little closer, his voice low, careful, almost hesitant yet filled with meaning. "Can I ask you something?" The words were simple, but they carried weight. Claire felt a chill run through her. Not from fear, but from the unknown of what might come next. That was the moment she realized the night was no longer ordinary. Something had changed between them, and no matter what happened next. She would remember this moment forever. Claire's heart was already unsteady when Ethan spoke again. His voice was calm, but the question landed heavier than anything she had expected. "Do you ever feel lonely when Dad is away?" The words seemed to echo in the quiet room. Claire blinked, caught off guard, her fingers tightening around the blanket. She had expected him to ask about something, ordinary work, dinner, plans for the week. But this question was different. It wasn't casual. It wasn't small talk. It reached somewhere deeper, somewhere she wasn't sure she wanted to go. She gave a quick smile, hoping to lighten the weight of the moment. "Of course, I miss him. That's normal, isn't it? In marriage, you learn to be patient." Her voice sounded steady, but inside she felt shaken. She tried to convince herself that Ethan's words were innocent, that he was only trying to show concern. Yet the way he looked at her with eyes that didn't waver made it impossible to dismiss so easily. His expression wasn't playful. It was thoughtful, searching, almost as if he was waiting for an answer that went beyond what she had given him. Claire leaned back against the couch, pretending to focus on the television. She wanted to close the subject, to move on quickly before things turned uncomfortable. But she could feel Ethan's gaze still on her. Gentle but unyielding. It wasn't the kind of look you gave someone when you were only curious. It was the kind of look that carried, meaning the silence stretched. The show on the TV played on, but neither of them laughed. The room felt heavy, filled with words that had not been spoken. Claire's pulse quickened. She didn't want to admit it, but she could feel her heart responding in ways she didn't expect. She adjusted the blanket and tried again. Her voice quiet, but firm. "Ethan, you don't need to worry about me. I'm fine." "Really?" But her words didn't seem to convince him. He gave a small nod, but his eyes stayed on her, like he wanted to say something more. And when he finally spoke again, Claire realized this night was leading to a place she had never imagined. "You always act strong," Ethan said softly, "but I see it sometimes. The way you sit here alone when Dad's away, the way you look at the phone, hoping he'll call. I don't think you should have to feel that way." Claire froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized he had noticed these things. She thought she had hidden her quiet loneliness, the way she filled her days, the way she tried not to feel the ache of waiting. She never wanted anyone to see that side of her, least of all him. Her cheeks grew warm. Not with anger, but with embarrassment tanned. Something else she didn't dare name. She turned to him quickly, her voice firmer this time. "Ethan, that's enough. You shouldn't say things like that." But even as she spoke, her voice trembled. And Ethan didn't back away. His expression stayed steady, calm, almost gentle. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone soft. I think you deserve more attention. That's all." The words hung in the air like a secret too heavy to carry. Claire's chest tightened. She wanted to be angry, to tell him he was out of line. But the truth was that his words touched something inside her she had tried to bury. She did feel lonely when David was away. She did long for more than brief phone calls and hurried promises to make up for lost time. And now Ethan had spoken the very thing she tried so hard not to admit. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not the boy who used to live in this house, but the man he had become. His voice was steady, his expression filled with concern. His words carrying a kind of care she hadn't expected. Her mind raced. She thought of David, of their years together, of the vows they had made. She loved him. She knew she did. But she also couldn't ignore the quiet ache that came with his absence, the long stretches of days that felt empty. And now, sitting beside Ethan, that ache was exposed, raw, undeniable. Claire's hands tightened around the blanket again. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Marriage isn't about always getting what you want. It's about choosing to stay even when it's hard." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze still steady. "I know. I'm not saying you should walk away. I don't like seeing you sad." His words were simple, but they shook her. She felt both comforted and unsettled at the same time. No one had said that to her before. Not even David. Her husband loved her, yes. But he had never noticed the small cracks, the quiet signs of loneliness she carried. Ethan had noticed. And that made everything feel dangerously different. Claire turned back to the television, though her mind was far from the show. She needed to end this moment before it went any further, before the line between them blurred in a way she couldn't undo. But even as she tried to create distance, her thoughts betrayed her. His words replayed in her mind, soft but sharp. "You deserve more attention." The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. The room felt warmer, her chest rising and falling faster than she wanted. She wished David would call at that moment just to break the silence, just to remind her where her heart belonged. But the phone remained quiet, and Ethan remained beside her, his presence filling the space in ways she couldn't escape. Claire knew she had to say something to close the subject once and for all. She cleared her throat, forcing a calm tone. "Ethan, thank you for your concern, but I'm fine. I've been through this before. Your father and we understand each other. We know how to make it work." He looked at her, nodded once more, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the nod. Something that told her he wasn't convinced. Something that told her he had already seen through the wall she was trying to build. And then, just as Claire thought the moment might end, Ethan leaned slightly closer, his voice low, carrying words that would stay with her long after this night was over. "I just don't want you to feel invisible." Her breath caught again. She didn't know what to say. The sentence was simple, but it reached the part of her she kept hidden from everyone. She felt her chest tighten with a mix of emotions, gratitude, fear, longing, guilt. The television played on, but Claire and Ethan sat in silence, caught in a moment that neither of them could name. She knew she had to stop it, to stand up, to walk away, but her body felt frozen, and in that silence, she realized something she didn't want to admit. The night was no longer safe. Something had shifted, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't go back to the way things were just an hour ago. The living room was the same. The television was the same. The blanket in her hands was the same. But everything inside her had changed. Shouldn't say things like that. The silence between them was thick. Claire's heart beat faster, her thoughts scattered, when Ethan finally spoke again. His voice was low, almost as if he was afraid of his own words. "I know it's not my place." He began carefully, "But sometimes I feel like you deserve more attention. More than Dad gives you." The words landed heavily. Claire froze, her breath caught in her chest. She turned toward him, her eyes wide, searching his face. He didn't look away. There was no teasing in his tone, no careless remark. He meant every word. Her stomach tightened. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Did he really just say that? Why would he say that? Does he realize what this means? Claire pulled the blanket tighter, trying to shield herself from the weight of his words. She wanted to speak, to dismiss what he had said, but her voice betrayed her. "Ethan," she whispered, "you can't say things like that. You don't know what you're stirring up." But even as she said it, she heard the tremor in her tone. It wasn't firm, it wasn't final. It was soft, almost pleading, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince him. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on hers. They weren't demanding, but they were steady, full of something she didn't expect: care, concern, even longing. Claire had known him for years, yet she had never seen him look at her this way. Her heart pounded harder. She thought of David, of their marriage, of the vows they had spoken. She thought of all the time she had waited for him, trusted him, defended him. And yet, in this moment, all she could feel was the closeness of the young man sitting beside her. A closeness that felt too much, too dangerous. She tried to remind herself who Ethan was: her husband's son. The boy who had once left dirty sneakers by the door. The teenager who had asked her advice before prom. But that image no longer fit. The man in front of her wasn't a boy. He was someone who saw her differently. Someone who dared to say out loud what she had tried so hard to bury in silence. Her mind screamed, "Stop this!" But her heart ached in a way she couldn't ignore. "I don't mean to upset you," Ethan said gently, his voice steady. I can't stand watching you feel forgotten." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, her breath shaky. Forgotten. The word cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She wasn't supposed to agree. She wasn't supposed to let it touch her, but it did. She remembered every lonely night, every quiet dinner, every unanswered text when David was too busy. She remembered pretending to be fine, always strong, always patient. And now Ethan had put it into words, simple and raw. When she opened her eyes again, Ethan was still watching her. The television flickered in the background, but the room belonged to only them now. The space between them felt charged, fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter everything. Claire's throat felt tight. "You shouldn't be saying this," she repeated, this time firmer. "It's not right." But Ethan didn't back away. His gaze softened. "But I can't pretend I don't notice. You deserve someone who makes you feel seen." The words hit her again, sharper this time because they echoed what she secretly longed for. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to be more than the patient wife waiting for calls and messages that sometimes never came. Her emotions swirled: gratitude, fear, guilt, even a flicker of something she didn't want to name. She felt vulnerable, like he had read her heart without permission. And that vulnerability scared her more than anything. Claire shook her head, trying to ground herself. "Ethan, please. This can't go on. Whatever you think you feel, you need to stop." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure if they convinced either of them. She wasn't angry. She wasn't pushing him away. She was caught between her loyalty to David and the unexpected tenderness of Ethan's confession. Her pulse raced as Ethan leaned forward slightly. Not too close, but enough that she felt the shift. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know." Claire's chest rose and fell quickly. She wanted to stand, to walk away, to put space between them. But her body stayed still, frozen in the weight of the moment. His words, so careful yet so bold, had left her shaken. She finally managed to speak, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? Why now?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. Then he sighed. "Because I've watched you for years and I see more than you think. You smile, but sometimes it doesn't reach your eyes. You take care of everyone else, but who takes care of you?" Claire felt tears sting the back of her eyes. She blinked quickly, trying to push them back. She couldn't let him see how close his words had struck. She couldn't let him know that he was right. "I don't want to hear this," he whispered, though her voice was softer than she intended. But Ethan didn't argue. He simply looked at her, his eyes calm, his face steady, his silence saying more than any words could. The room felt too small. Claire felt too seen. She gripped the blanket, her knuckles pale, her chest aching with a mixture of emotions she couldn't sort. Her mind screamed for her to stop this before it went any further. She thought of David again, of the life they had built, of the love they still shared. But she also couldn't ignore the truth. Ethan had noticed her pain in a way David never had. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The television played a scene of laughter, but it felt distant, unreal. The only reality was the charged silence between them. The confession hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Finally, Claire forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. "We can't ever talk about this again." The television kept running, but neither Claire nor Ethan cared anymore. The air between them was heavier than the walls could hold. Every second felt stretched, every silence too sharp. Claire's chest rose and fell quickly as she searched for strength. She had to take control of the moment before it slipped further away. Slowly, she pulled the blanket tighter and stood. Her legs felt stiff, her hands trembling, but she forced herself to move. "It's late," she said softly, her voice quieter than she hoped it would be. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow will feel clearer." Ethan nodded, but his eyes carried something deeper. He didn't argue, didn't press her, but the sadness in his gaze was enough to make her heart twist. It was the look of someone who had revealed too much and couldn't take it back. Claire turned away quickly, afraid that if she met his eyes again, her resolve would crumble. She walked toward the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. Each step felt heavy, as though she was walking through water. She reached her bedroom door, her hand on the knob, and paused, behind her. Ethan still sat on the couch, the glow of the TV outlining his figure. He looked younger in that light, yet not a boy more, like a man caught between choices. Claire's chest tightened. She wanted to say something to soften the moment, but words failed her. Instead, she slipped into her room, closing the door gently behind her. Inside the room, the quiet felt overwhelming. She leaned against the door, closing her eyes. Her heart raced, her thoughts tangled. What had just happened? How had a simple night of television turned into a confession that now lived between them, impossible to erase? Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She thought of David, the man she had married, the man she still loved. She thought of his laugh, his promises, his long absences. She thought of how she had always told herself to be strong, to endure the distance, to never complain. And then she thought of Ethan's words, "You deserve more attention. I don't want you to feel invisible." Tears welled in her eyes, quiet and uninvited. She wasn't crying out of anger or betrayal. She was crying because for the first time in years, someone had seen her loneliness and spoken it aloud. And that someone was not her husband, it was Ethan. She wiped her face quickly, shaking her head. This wasn't right. She had to be stronger than this. She couldn't let one night, one conversation change the way she saw everything. She repeated it to herself again and again. "I love David. I chose him. This ends tonight." But even as she whispered those words in her mind, her heart argued back. Why did Ethan notice what David had missed? Why did his concern feel so real, so steady? The night stretched on. Claire lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the house. She heard the TV finally click off. Then she heard footsteps retreat down the hallway. A door closed. Silence followed. She closed her eyes tightly, trying to will herself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she drifted, Ethan's voice returned to her. The softness of his words, the way he had looked at her, not like a son looking at his father's wife, but like a man looking at someone he cared for deeply. Her stomach twisted with guilt. She hated herself for feeling anything at all, for letting his words reach her. She hated the ache in her chest, the small part of her that felt comforted by his honesty. She hated that she couldn't push it away as easily as she wanted when morning light finally spilled through the curtains. Claire sat up with heavy eyes. The house was quiet. She padded to the kitchen, making coffee with hands that still trembled. She told herself to focus on normal things. Breakfast, errands, the day ahead. Normal things would make this feeling fade. But as she poured her coffee, she saw Ethan's jacket hanging by the door, and her chest tightened again. Everything in the house now carried a new weight, as if the walls themselves remembered what had been said. She shook her head and whispered, "This can't happen. It ends here." Yet deep inside she knew nothing had truly ended. Words like Ethan's didn't disappear. They lingered, they echoed, they stayed alive in quiet corners of the heart. She knew he hadn't meant to ruin anything, but he had crossed a line that could never be fully erased. As she sat at the table, sipping her coffee, she thought about the future. David would come home soon, smiling, tired, expecting everything to be the same. Claire would greet him, hug him, pretend nothing had shifted in his absence. But inside her, the change was already there. The memory of Ethan's voice, his eyes, his steady concern, it would not leave her. She didn't know what it meant or what would happen next. She only knew that last night had drawn a line in her life, the time before Ethan's words, and the time after. She pressed her palms against her face, whispering to herself, "Hold on to what matters. Hold on to David. Don't let this destroy you." Still, the ache in her chest didn't fade. It pulsed quietly, reminding her of the moment she had felt truly seen, truly heard. And though she told herself it was wrong, though she promised herself it would go no further, she knew the truth this night would live with her, a secret that would never fully go away. The choice was clear. She would stay loyal. She would protect her marriage. She would not let herself fall. But the question remained, silent and sharp. Should she ever forget what Ethan had said? Or would it change everything between them forever? Asterisk.